the 40-meter death trap that killed half the Canadian Army. Battle of the Walcheren Causeway, Netherlands, October to November 1944. Everyone talks about D-Day. Some talk about Market Garden, but almost nobody talks about one of the deadliest places Allied soldiers ever fought. It was only 40 meters long, not a beach, not a city, just a narrow strip of raised road. And crossing it nearly destroyed an entire Canadian force. This was the Battle of the Walcheren Causeway, what many veterans later called the deadliest 40 meters of World War II. By the autumn of 1944, the Allies were winning battles fast. France was largely liberated. Paris was free. Germany looked like it was finally cracking. But behind the scenes, the Allied advance was slowing down for one familiar reason: supplies, fuel, food, ammunition. The port of Antwerp had been captured intact, an absolute gift. But there was a problem. The Germans still controlled the Scheldt estuary, the waterway leading to the port. As long as they held it, Antwerp was useless. And at the center of that problem sat Walcheren Island. Walcheren wasn't just an island, it was a fortress. The Germans had turned it into a concrete nightmare: bunkers, gun batteries, minefields, and artillery covering every approach. The Allies decided to flood the island by bombing its dikes, hoping water would weaken German defenses. It worked. But it also created something worse. A flooded battlefield with only narrow paths of dry land left to attack across. One of those paths was the Walcheren Causeway, 40 meters wide, raised slightly above the flooded land on both sides, completely exposed. No trees, no trenches, no cover, and on the far end German machine guns, mortars, and artillery waiting. The Canadians were ordered to cross it. By late October 1944, Canadian forces had already been fighting non-stop for weeks. They were exhausted, cold, under strength. But this mission mattered. If the Scheldt wasn't cleared, the Allied war machine would stall. If Antwerp stayed closed, soldiers at the front would run out of everything. So the order stood: cross the causeway, or the war slows to a crawl. When the first Canadian units stepped onto the causeway, they immediately understood the problem. The Germans had perfect fields of fire. Every step forward was visible. Every movement drew bullets. The flooded land on both sides meant you couldn't leave the road without drowning or being stuck in mud. Men advanced knowing there was nowhere to hide. Machine guns opened up almost immediately. Mortars rained down. Artillery zeroed in with terrifying accuracy. Entire sections were cut down in seconds. Those who fell had nowhere to be pulled to. Wounded men lay exposed, screaming for help that couldn't reach them. This wasn't maneuver warfare. This was a shooting gallery. Wave after wave tried to push forward, and wave after wave was shattered. Casualties climbed so fast that units stopped counting until after the attacks ended. By the end, some Canadian battalions had lost nearly 50% of their men killed or wounded on that single strip of road. 40 meters. Veterans later said it felt longer than any battlefield they had ever crossed. The psychological toll was brutal. Imagine knowing that every step forward puts you in perfect view of the enemy, that going back means failure and standing still means death. Some soldiers froze, others ran forward anyway. Not because they believed they would survive, but because someone had to keep moving. Acts of desperate heroism happened constantly. Men crawled forward under fire to drag wounded comrades back. Small groups charged bunkers knowing they wouldn't return. Officers stood upright to direct fire, becoming instant targets. This wasn't about tactics anymore. It was about endurance. Eventually, after days of failed assaults and mounting losses, commanders realized the causeway alone could not be forced cheaply. The fight shifted. Amphibious landings, commando raids, and attacks from other directions slowly broke the German grip on Walcheren Island. The causeway assaults were scaled back, but the damage had already been done. Canadian units that crossed or tried to cross that road would never be the same. When Walcheren finally fell, the Scheldt was cleared. Mines were removed, and Antwerp began receiving supplies. Within weeks, the Allied advance surged forward again. The front lines moved, the war continued, and the causeway faded into history. There were no iconic photos, no famous speeches, no victory parades for those 40 meters, just rows of graves and men who never spoke about what they saw there. Today, when people talk about World War II, they remember the beaches of Normandy, they remember Arnhem, they remember the Battle of the Bulge, but the Battle of the Walcheren Causeway remains largely unknown, even though it may have been one of the most brutally unforgiving fights Allied soldiers ever faced. It reminds us of something uncomfortable. Not all decisive moments look heroic. Some look hopeless, some look pointless, but wars are won not just by bold victories. They're won by soldiers who walk into impossible places because they're told it matters. For the Canadians at Walcheren, it mattered. 40 meters decided whether an army could be fed, whether an advance could continue, whether victory could move forward, and half of them paid the price. So when you hear about World War I's great battles, remember this one: the flooded island, the fortress guns, and the deadliest 40 meters of the war. Because sometimes history's most important battles happen in the smallest places and cost far more than anyone ever wanted to pay. Do you know another battle that resembles this story? Tell us to research on it and unveil how it was to make people informed.